what is today known as, grooming gangs, it's nothing new. It is just a new term for a very, very old phenomenon that is, as old as Islam itself. There are two things basically, which, Islam in its operation, in its real world operation, physical operation holds, which is also sanctified by scripture, because it's only Islam that in Islam that there's no real difference between theory and practice. Muhammad showed it through practice, and then that Quran came about. It was codified in the Quran, just to simplify it very, very compressed form. So from that perspective, it all goes back to this what is also sanctioned by the Islamic doctrine of regarding Kafir land, because the entire earth belongs to Allah, and the non-conquered part of the earth, they still haven't seen light and wisdom that only Islam can bring, which Allah can bring through the message of the so-called prophet. Is that two things are primary, which is, enough history has, there's enough historical records on that, is that land and women are prized in Islam. That is, non-Muslim lands and non-Muslim women. Somebody was mentioning about, reading out from the Quran about, how women were treated as booty, then sold as slaves, and then just to multiply the fold and all that. So grooming, because today, the nature of warfare and the nature of politics itself has dramatically changed from even last 150 years. The world, somebody in the mid 19th century, if he or she were to come and live in today's world, he would find it unrecognizable. It has changed very dramatically. So you're talking about a few hundred years, at least 1,000 years. Is that the warfare, the methods, and the scripture remains the same, except that the vocabulary has changed. That you can, Pakistan or any of these Gulf countries, they can't, physically take up an army and go out and invade, do a jihad and conquer Spain or Belgium or India or something like that. It's no longer possible. So what has happened is that, what is the next best route, right? So what is known as grooming gangs is this, right? That, you usurp Kafir land and Kafir women. Now, all traditional societies, for example, traditional Christian societies, I don't think they don't exist any longer. I'm subject to correction, in the sense that which was there in medieval Europe or pre-medieval Europe. It doesn't exist anymore. So which is the only last remaining, traditional society in some form or the other? It is a Hindu society. So let's look at, the European or the Western societies, which have, largely discarded any notion of Christianity or any notion of religion, both in their politics and in their the way their society actually functions, the values they believe in, their lifestyles and everything. So they are unable to come up with, or even study at any rate, or the notion that, these grooming gangs, there is a scriptural reason they do this. That, it is drilled into them. What in India we call, the West calls it grooming gangs. Here we call it love jihad. So this is what I keep saying, and I've written fairly on multiple occasions, that for the longest time, India is the only country which has actually shown the entire world how to deal with Islam. For a simple reason, until the arrival of Mr. Mohandas Gandhi, but that's a different topic. So we have shown the world how to actually deal with Islam in a very, very highly effective way. And because India is unfortunately the biggest victim and the last survivor of Islam. None of the ancient civilizations which first came at the first contact with Islam, they were wiped out. So they there are no living beings to actually tell their tale. We continue to do that. We have that. So unfortunately, the West should be learning from, taking lessons, studying Hindu history, and especially the history of Islam in India and how we dealt with it. So these grooming gangs, all these, whatever is happening there in across Europe, Germany, Rotterdam, Netherlands, Britain, all that, if a book like Londonistan could not wake up England, nothing else can wake up. So it is scripturally sanctified, but it has taken a different form. And I suppose, that in a way that answers your question. And on, I can't, kind of resist giving this take, just adding a small point to this whole thing about moderate Islam. Salman Rushdie's apology, more than 20 or 30 years after he got the fatwa, his apology is the biggest counter to this whole myth of moderate Islam. As simple as that.
Can you elaborate on that, Sandeepji? That's a very interesting insight.
Yeah, well, for the longest time, Salman Rushdie was regarded as this icon of free speech and free expression, that he stood for this scientific temper and all that. I'm sure he does. I mean, I don't know much about, I can't read his mind. But the point is that he was funded by the British taxpayer for more than 2 decades, all because the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, he put a fatwa on his head saying that, I'm going to kill you, my boys are going to kill you, they're going to do a jihad on you for writing satanic verses. Okay, and then same Salman Rushdie also said, beware of, he wrote a beautiful essay in those days, when he still had that, whatever you call his spirit, that, beware of Muhammad. He actually, be careful with Muhammad, if my memory is right. He wrote a beautiful essay, it's available on the internet, you can read it. From that to nearly 30 years later, he gave an apology to, the same clerics. Khomeini is a cleric, basically the most bigoted kind of a person you'll ever find. So he said, he didn't, obviously his apology was not directed at the cleric, but he worded it beautifully that, because I wrote this book, it has caused needless controversy, and I feel very sad and sorry for being responsible for it. This he's saying after 30 years of being under police protection funded by the taxpayers of England. So this is surrender. So if you say courage, right, you have to be courageous enough to face death. Ultimately, that's what courage means. Otherwise, it's useless, right? That no matter what danger comes, I will stick to my principles. So there, that punctures your whole thing of moderate Islam, right? Look at